All right, so it's Todd Atkins here, and I'm with Miguel Iterati, and we're going to talk about ONE FC's debut in Denver, Colorado, U.S. debut, and kind of what we took away from it, and kind of the challenges they're going to face in trying to compete with the UFC in the U.S. So before we start, as always, check out our sponsor, Live to Fight Design. If you use my promo code Todd Atkins, you can get 20% off your order. They make fight banners and gym banners. So check them out on Instagram at Live to Fight Design. Now, Miguel, I want to ask you, because obviously you've been involved with Bodog TV. Y'all did a bunch of episodes. So let's kind of talk about, well, let's just talk about your overall impressions of the ONE debut first, and then we'll go to there.
Okay, I think the MMA media in this country is very skewed for the UFC. So they didn't get as much attention as I think they could have, or should have. Um, Interestingly, I think their presence is should ultimately be weighed as more of a threat to the UFC. I'm not sure it's a major threat, but should be weighed more as of a threat to the UFC than anything. Bellator and the PFL may be planning to do together with or without Ngannou, or however all that plays out. I don't think um, that they have a long-term plan. I think ONE does, and that's what made it interesting. They put their flag in the United States, after many years of operating in Asia, and they showed a pretty mature show with good talent. Um, Definitely a different style and approach to the martial arts game than the UFC. And in that respect, I think that they're, philosophically, they're going to be okay with the hardcores and stuff. I don't know you know, uh, how much legs they have to go up against the UFC. It's still a mountain.
Now, one thing I want to touch on, because you just brought this up, and we talked about this actually last episode, is that they didn't really have a lot of presence as far as going around doing interviews and having their fighters out there doing a lot on social media and whatnot. What do you make of that?
Well, I noticed a few things. I know, you have Matt Hume, you have Rich Franklin, who, at some point you have to meet, at some point that's some of the management that on the state side I thought that they would use, and they didn't really use them in the press. They used Chowdhury, the owner. And I think that that's maybe a reaction to Dana's approach from the early days, where they're going to have one face and one voice, and it's going to come from him. He's extremely well spoken in English. I imagine that he dominates in which of the foreign languages they run in primarily. The Chinese. I'm sorry to be ignorant. I'm not sure, but um, the guy's a presence. The guy's a good front man. He speaks well philosophically about the sport. He knows what he's presenting, and he's clearly in it for the long term. Especially if you hear rumors about their finances and stuff. At the end of the day, they would have had to make an application for a boxing, to a boxing commission in Colorado for a license to promote. And in there would have had to be some financial paperwork. I don't know, what's enough or what the threshold is there, but you don't just get a promotion, a promotional license out of the blue. There is a process to it. So whatever's there, they successfully ran. They put their flag in the ground in the States. And that's what I mean. The commissions could be a giant hurdle for a lot of mid-level promotions or smaller. They're above that. They've managed it, and that's a good thing. They have a different weigh-in process. They had to convince the commissions of that. They had to convince, commissions. When was the last time you think there was that level of Muay Thai in Denver? Ever? It's
Mhm.
like how, and then grappling on top of it, like the boxing commission is going to be like, wait, we're hands off on that. They had to navigate all that, and they made it happen. And that's a strong point for them. Um, on the back end, they do come with a full office like the UFC, where that means that each individual fighter has a guy assigned to them that sends them their contract in their language, and that person's constantly communicating with them, getting camera people to them. Um, finding out information about, okay, who's coming with you, cornermen, making sure everybody's visas and everything was getting everybody to the United States, from Thailand and Singapore and out there and in Mexico and some of the other places they did. They didn't have a huge roster of American fighters. So there was a lot of structural paperwork that went into the show that they successfully pulled off. I didn't see any canceled fights, of any of the major level.
Yeah, and what did you make of how their stars kind of came off, like Rod Tong and Stamp, Demetrius, you know?
Yeah, I think that right now I don't know if they're going to be happy with it, but the little guys only get you so far. And, that's unfortunate that the American public is that way, but it is. If you look at the example of boxing, in the post Mayweather years, seems to be Canelo that's dominated, the money coming in and took over for Mayweather. But the best boxer was actually a guy named Chocolatito from Nicaragua, who was 113 pounder, so nobody really cared about him. And he spent time. I think he got to American pay-per-view or HBO a couple of times and got a couple of minor paydays for what life is. You know what I mean? But here was the guy who was clearly the best boxer at the moment. Nobody cared. I had professional world champion professional boxers, 168 pounders said to me, well, Canelo's the next big thing, this, that, and the other thing. I said, what about Chocolatito? Not interested. Not interested in the little guys. And I think, unfortunately, America is going to need a lot of education to break that. To break that little stigma of ours where they like that. They like the big guys, et cetera, et cetera. Because one right now doesn't have the roster for that.
Yeah, I think we're seeing that. Just to mention, now that you mentioned Chocolatito, but I think we're seeing that with Inoue in Japan. Like Teddy Atlas on his show said, this guy's as good as anybody fighting.
Yeah,
His
yeah,
skills
you're
are
absolutely
unbelievable, but nobody cares. At least in the
yeah.
US, nobody cares. Japan, they care, but not in the US.
Yeah, in Japan, you can be a certain level start, but unfortunately, and I'm not sure of how things are in the current state, but very siloed in Japan, right? So if you're an MMA fighter and a boxing fighter and stuff, and you break through and stuff, there's not a lot of camaraderie there. Anyway, the reason I bring that up is that Inoue is a guy who still mainly brings opponents into Japan and plays host rather than really exploring getting the biggest fights out there again, all in more risky territory. And that's not probably his decision, the way Japan works, right? So, alas, that's a problem. But I agree with you. Inoue could very well be the most skilled boxer on the planet right now.
Yeah. Now, I want you to kind of talk about from your experience. When people look at ONE FC, and I was guilty of this when I was younger because I didn't really understand the business, but everyone looks at ONE FC and they see the product. I mean, it's a good product, and also it's a diverse product like we've talked about, which is something that appeals to us, hardcores especially. But how hard is it for them? How hard is it going to be for them to compete with the UFC? And why do you think that is?
Well, you know, the idea to me from the early days of MMA was, and you hear the old time fighters saying, if you were on the UFC roster, they did 5 shows a year. You knew you were one of the best, because of the 5 shows a year kind of thing. And when Zuffa bought it, and you always sort of saw the sport beyond the UFC, but the sport in general always migrated towards there being more and more shows. So that activity is what you have to monitor and be able to deliver, right? So the only one who is set to deliver weekly shows or content on multiple platforms is the UFC. And they went from Spike TV was their foot in the door. They were on television, right? At some point, they were doing shows on Fox, and that was with their deal with Fox Sports. And then they went, with ESPN, and there have been other delivery platforms for other, that's why they created things like the Fight Night shows and, the foreign shows as well, the Fight Night in Brazil, the Fight Nights in Europe, and things like that could all be because they're going to deliver them on a TV platform whether you like it or not, so they can deliver it every week. And like, for example, Bellator, PFL, and to my understanding, I don't know how one's deal is. One, say potentially one ramps up and now it has enough content to deliver weekly, a, a new weekly fight show and all the supporting stuff. Is their platform where they're distributing in the United States, I think is Amazon Prime, right? Um, is Amazon going to say, just bring on the content and put it out there? Or are they going to say, well, we were kind of happy with, 2 shows a month. I don't know if we got room for, 5 shows a month. But that's what the UFC delivers, basically. You can see them every week. And if it's not new content, it's a build-up show, or whatever. And then there's all kinds of online media stuff. And that's where they break, every company's back. Bellator is a non-starter. PFL to me is a non-starter as competition for them. For this very reason, is that there's a TV company that owns them and says, here's the season. You got shows, for February, March, April, and then, May and June will show reruns in their TV thinking, and then you're off, 3 months until September again. You can't do that. The UFC understands that, because what every week, by having weekly shows, what they can do is they can plug in and play with people. Freeze people out, it fast. But, somebody gets injured, you like the guy, you want to see him, you can find a fight 1-2 weeks out there and use the same training camp. And, Bellator doesn't have that flexibility. Your fight drops in Bellator, and it's, the second show of a 3-show set that they're doing with nothing announced in the future, and you have no idea when you're coming back to fight. So I one with, like I said, Rich Franklin, Matt Hume, a core of fight people will understand that integrally. I think that they have to have as many fights to offer as the UFC, or they're going to be dealing with an inferior roster, and that's what they don't want to do. They don't want to be known as just a little guy division. Yeah, they're better at the lightweights, but to see the real heavyweights and stuff, because that's always going to carry cash with the American market.
Yeah, I mean, and the other thing that we were going to touch on is how important it is for them to break into Vegas at some point, and how hard will that be?
Yeah, like I said, they put their flag in the ground, but I do think that Colorado is not a major boxing commission, and I do think that Vegas, or I don't know if Jersey still qualifies, Vegas or California, basically at this point. If they want to do it with one of those commissions with all their different weight, the way I remember the commission's situation is if they're friendly with you, they work with you, they deal with you. But here's a situation where they are going to have a new weigh-in and weight system explained to them, and weight classes are different. So I could see a commission saying, "Nah, we're not going to deal with that," and just shutting it down right away. No, you have to meet these standards that are the rules. And if you don't do that, no show, no promoter's license, no nothing. Now, they've overcome that initial hurdle in Colorado, but in Vegas becomes another interesting factor, is that Vegas allows gambling, right? Nevada allows gambling. So at some point, there's going to be a gambling control board that also takes interest in one's finances. And this would be a big hurdle for them, I think. And also a big hurdle that if they overcome it, it is a big signal that they're coming, and that idea that their money's not kosher because it comes from overseas or whatever is probably going to be there's nobody going to be stricter than the gaming control board about money and where their money's coming from. They want to know if you're bringing a show to Vegas, if you've got the juice to affect gambling on it and that sort of stuff. That's what Vegas has to worry about. They didn't have to deal with that in Colorado. So Vegas could literally look at the finances and go, man, you gave me a spreadsheet with, incomplete, or they could say, okay, stamp and go ahead. So it really is a shot in the dark. They say Vegas is Dana's town. So yeah, if they decided to play by the book, things could be very hard for one.
You think that their finances would be an issue?
I know I'm not qualified to answer that. The thing is, there are rumors you've heard out there that they're 10 times further in the hole than the UFC ever was before the UFC righted it, and that they showed really no signs of stopping. Again, expanding to the UFC. I had a conversation within the last year of Matt Hume where they've been trying to produce movies and stuff, kind of like they have big ideas and big endeavor type of connections in Asia. So I can't they and when Matt Hume gets a salary, he's in America, he's going to have to report his salary and line items and stuff on taxes. But the main company has no reporting in the United States. So, who knows what laws to begin with are they subject to, But if he has a very successful business doing X, which chip making or something like that, that the money just doesn't seem to go away and he just throws it all into one because it's his passion, and the books at the end of the day it's legal there, we really can't say anything about it. And I don't know anything about it other than that there's a negative vibe to it, that they are in the hole and that they aren't making money and stuff. And we'll see about that. Like I said, there are a few hundred shows into this, and this presentation was strong enough, especially with Chowdhury, moving up front and being the front man for the company, gives us an idea of what is coming from them and things, and that's a very organized presentation. I think um, they made a good first step.
Now, I want to ask you about something because you were very involved back in this time as far as when Pride got to Vegas. Did you hear anything about that or how they may have got over some of those hurdles?
I believe by that point, um, this is just speculation, but I think the timetable will bear me out. I think they did two shows in Vegas. I think before they got to the first show, the writing was on the wall that the UFC was going to buy them. So I think a lot of what we heard was that Pride did the shows in the US kind of to go out with a bang, as like a face saving kind of method measure for their culture, that they had to go out with something big, and that's what it was. And that transcended what we saw in the ring too, because um for the very last show, there was rumors that they chartered two 747s and bought most of the staff over, to see it, and it was kind of like a goodbye kind of thing. So once you're in Vegas and that's Dana and the Fertitas' town, um, yeah, I think that they were already the writing was on the wall, and it was already their company, so they had to sort of deal with um, they benefited from having the show in the U.S. It was worth more at the end when they bought it, and they got it for cheap anyway, right? So, yeah, I think that's what happened there. I don't think they had to deal with some of the hurdles, but they could have, down to they were allowed to be in a ring. You know what I mean? That could even be a showstopper if you read some of the regulations, especially from the old days. Maybe there have been adjustments and things have happened, but some of them, if not, then you've got to apply for adjustments to the legal rules, which I think the UFC put in there, has to be in a cage. MMA is in a cage. So you can't do a ring. Pride would have had to overcome that and get the ring approved on the side. Little hurdles like that start to add up after a while, and they're very taxing on an organization. So that's a game I think that we've seen actively played in this sport. And, like I said, that's why it's a good sign that one's overcome that to a certain level. And Vegas would be another level.
Now, maybe talk about what you think. No one can know. We don't have a crystal ball, but maybe like the short term, what you think we'll see from one as far as in the US.
Well, I think that they're going to do another show this year. And, if they have another successful show like the one they just pulled off, maybe they'll announce a third show before the end of the year. And I think that they'll have some type of tournament or international type of structure where some of the Americans that excel on American television, go get to fight in Asia and get to taste what a big show is in Asia. You know what I mean? Whereas a lot of it is like trying to get to Vegas or get to the big shows for the UFC. They're going to offer their own flavor of that. So we could see the US and even the Latin market turn into a region for them that they're going to have to nurture. And that nurturing is probably, you know, for a roster that like they're going to need is probably, 3 to 5 years. And make sure that you've got the output on, where to put it on for people to see and et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, they have to enact a real serious business plan. And that's what I'm hoping for because it's multifaceted.
Yeah, I mean it's gonna be interesting to see. Now, let's touch on one other thing. Chatri's kind of taking some shots at the UFC. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I think that no matter, at the end of the day, nobody's seen the books. Nobody knows for sure which company's bigger or whatever. They've always come across and said, "Oh no, we're bigger." They have some people that'll say, "No, if you look and then, in China and this, they may actually be a bigger, moving more money kind of company than even Endeavor or what the UFC's got going on." I don't know if I believe that. You know what I mean? I really don't know if I'm sure about that. Maybe if you pull in all this other guy's businesses and stuff, I'm not qualified to say any of that. But I think it's smart of Chowdhury to say very clearly in the media and stuff, it's the UFC and us. Nobody, they don't mention anybody else. Everybody else is below them and stuff. And they just by that they've already executed, a bucket list item. Become the other company and then take over for, beat the number one guy from the number two spot, right? But they got to be number two first. And referring to themselves that way makes sense.
Yeah, but usually Dana White will respond to somebody who kind of like tries to call them out, but it doesn't seem like UFC is paying any attention, or at least publicly, they're not giving them any attention.
Yeah, I think that this WWE deal, even if it doesn't go any further than now, like, and we've speculated that they might buy a boxing entity and really try to lock up combat sports. I do sincerely think that that is, at least been talked about. Yeah, maybe they can't pull it off, but they've tried. But even if it's just the WWE and UFC, now we're dealing with another stratosphere of media attention and outlets. The WWE has some advantages over the UFC, basically history and pedigree, right? They can refer to, the next, I don't know if they're at WrestleMania 50 quite yet, but they got to be getting close, and they're long term. You watch, their guys are very controlled. Like the UFC tries to control their guys. A lot of that comes from the WWE contract, but you can't just get an interview with a WWE superstar, just who's walking down the street and put a camera in his face. He'll turn you down because his contract could be an issue. They're very controlled over all that. And the WWE showed the UFC some of that, and it works for them. So I think what we're going to see there is them look. When you see Randy Orton, a lot of the clips, they start to repeat themselves. And one of them is the NFL's got his Super Bowl, and we have WrestleMania. They always, and that's like what one is doing with the UFC, right? Always compare yourself to someone bigger. But they
Right.
consider that's the competition, the Super Bowl. And if you could get into a situation where, you do a Super Bowl twice a year in this sport or a Super Bowl level event twice a year in this sport, the revenue they're going to make is totally different. And that's what I think they're focused on. Because none of the news that's happening, they're actually sitting above a roiling ocean of motion under them, with what's going on everywhere, even in boxing, with Fury and Usyk not getting done, is Ngannou going to be in the mix and this, everything, they just are floating above it. But they really don't seem to care. And I think it's because they're going to do something much bigger. and they're not worried about, one is, one's next show scheduled for September or October, that time frame. Come on. They're going to do 20 shows by then. How can they really honestly care or even consider it anything but a pesky fly? You know what I mean? At this point. Um, yeah, that's the main. They're not worried. The UFC. That's why the UFC is looking down at everybody.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. Like one had this show, and now all the momentum in the US will die down by September, long before that, because the UFC can just spam their content out every week, and
Yeah,
that show will be forgotten next week.
yeah, and UFC's. I mean, one's got a nice, social media stretch. They put out a lot of clips and a lot of things like that, and they very much capture what Chowdhury's tried to say, which is that they have a martial arts essence to them that the UFC seems to be missing. I like it. I like
Mm-hmm.
them in their presentation, but their next show is in September. Now, granted, they're doing shows in Thailand in between, and those will also be available at some point in some of these outlets like Amazon Prime and things. So there's more content there than just one show in 3 months. But the content, it's not there yet to compete with the UFC. And again, once you get to some of those cards in Asia, you're dealing with a list of smaller weight classes and also unpronounceable names. So maybe they get into that Japanese habit of just make up a name for them. I think they do. Yeah, Stamp to a certain extent is a made up name. It's a nickname, and Rotang I think is too. Maybe not. But they they got to pick some American names. I think to cross over and things. And I hate to say that, but I think you know that's what I that's what an 800-man roster allows the UFC to do internationally. I think that will break down to regions also where there's going to be like a Russian UFC where some of those guys are going to be fighting under the UFC flag over there and making it to the big shows. And that's what the UFC is going to execute. And then they could do a Super Bowl in Moscow, or I know politically that's the wrong example to give right now, but you get the picture is that they look at things at this point from above.
Yeah, and like we were saying with Inui, if you're not having your show in the US, it's pretty hard to capture the American audience.
Yeah, and Inoue would need the perfect, would need Shakur Stevenson to shrink, 15 pounds or whatever is necessary to get, somebody who's captured the American audience. Maybe Gervonta Davis, or but it's the weight classes aren't right. So yeah, that's a problem, is that he doesn't have an opponent. He was actually made to take out Chocolatito. The Japanese kind of brought him along. He's from a fighting family to do that number. They never met that I know of. In the early days when Chocolatito was at the top of his game, they didn't meet. Inoue seemed to skip a weight class, and he's done a lot of fighting in the lower weight classes. I'm not sure where he's up to now.
Well, he's going to
But
fight Fulton, which is a fairly big fight.
and what weight class?
I don't know the weight class. I would assume it's the same weight class he always fights at,
Okay, well
which I think
he's
is
there
25, right?
126. Okay,
Yeah,
I think that's super bantam.
right.
Yeah, super. So yeah, you need an American opponent. You need to make a fight, and that's we circle around and stuff. That's the Ngannou problem. Is Ngannou's just not an instant like major fight against anybody. He needs the right opponent to make interest, and he needs the opponent to be a bigger name and draw than him, or else it tops off.
Now, what do you think about Cejudo not winning this weekend?
I picked him, because I love to hate him, I guess, but um, it doesn't surprise me all the way. I mentioned in another podcast I do on odds for that if you look at boxing and even MMA, you find serviceable 36, 38-year olds at light heavyweight or heavyweight. Those guys fight until they're older, but to be sharp at the top of your game after 35 in the little weight class is very, very, very rare. I can think of one boxer from Argentina, a guy named Narvaez, who had like a 40-2 record at 40 years old. And then even then he fought a little bit longer, and it kind of came apart. The little guys count on speed and precision more than strength. And speed and precision are the first things that go. And they go in ways that, like, for example, Canelo. Now, this is the third fight in a row Canelo hasn't scored a knockout. Where's his power? Did he lose it? It's been a few years now.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just a shred of difference. But at the smaller weight classes, I knew Cejudo was going to be stronger, but he's going to be slower. And Aljamain is still pretty much at the top of his game. He's an underrated athlete as well.
Well, as always, I think your insight on the one FC stuff is really great, and I think it's important for fans to get sources of education on some of these topics, because it's important for people to know kind of where this is all coming from and, some of the past experiences. So I really appreciate you taking time to kind of break that down. And as always, I want to kind of give you a chance to talk about what you're up to with the MMA Collector, MMA Museum. Kind of talk about.
Well, I've been working with, a group of MMA collectors led by Ed Tyson, who's kind of like the main guy. We've been doing a show on collectible MMA memorabilia, stuff from the old days and things. He's got quite a collection. The hope is to have a museum or an online museum or something, some way for it to be seen. And that's what, today's episode. We released, I think, episode 13 or 12 today. And it's on one of Daijutsu Kase's Bushido trophies that he has. So just a wide variety of fun stuff that lets us talk about and remember the old days from a bunch of different perspectives. And we also attached to it an interview podcast called the MMA Museum, where tomorrow, maybe I'll have this out at the same time. We're debuting Jorge Rivera, El Conquistador, middleweight in the UFC, 8-7 record in the UFC before he retired. And I know him pretty well. We had an interview where, he wanted to get some stuff out for the record. And he was very honest and open, and I'm grateful for it. So we're doing what we do. We try to document history, the best way possible.
All right, Miguel. Well, as always, it's great talking with you and everyone that watches the podcast here and the episodes here. Appreciate the support. And as always, till next episode, take care.